I think he probably thought that he could rule forever.
But there he said to me, all the bets are paid, Pete. All your bets are paid.
By the 1990s, Charles Haughey's era was drawing to a close. The final acts of triumph and betrayal were about to be played out.
There would be the darker side. There is the darker side.
It was the time which I felt as low about anything in all of my political life.
We should have told the PDs to fuck off.
I think he felt totally betrayed by the state.
Confronted with the trust of simple people whom he really has probably betrayed.
In 1987, Charles Haughey was back in power after 5 years in opposition. This was his last chance to fulfill his early promise. Failure and scandal had engulfed his first 2 periods as Taoiseach.
Haughey was a different man, and when he came in, he made one of the most devastating addresses to the new government.
The Taoiseach said there will be blood from now on for quite a while on the carpet in the cabinet room, so kind of brace yourself, Bridget.
He was working under a huge threat, and the threat was the bankruptcy of the country.
It's going to be tough, it's going to be difficult, and there will be setbacks, but we're going to see it through.
And then he cut.
Hospital wards were closed. I mean, this was something unthinkable.
Cutting back on civil servants, cutting back on housing grants.
We'll stop the trains at Athlone, they won't go to Galway. That's how we'll save money in transport. I remember that one.
Oh, goodness, it was terrible.
Mr. Haughey was continuously heckled.
Despite the turmoil, Haughey secured support for his tough economic plans, from the unions and then, remarkably, from Fine Gael.
Surrounded the Taoiseach's car. A number of tomatoes were also thrown.
At 62, Haughey knew he had little time to lose.
Was among duty to protect the Taoiseach.
He was so determined to get things done in the most efficient way, in the shortest possible time. He had no time for bullshit whatsoever.
His government lived in fear of him, and that was the only way in which the very, very severe budgetary measures that were taken at that time could have been introduced.
Within 2 years, he had solved the problem of the Irish national debt. It was an extraordinary achievement.
Haughey also wanted to make his mark with grand projects to boost the economy. For years, a plan to turn Dublin's docklands into a global financial centre had failed to take root. Then the man behind the proposal went to Haughey.
Everybody was opposed to it. I went to Charlie and I said to Charlie, everybody's objected to this here. Civil servants, the captains of industry, and I said it's not going to, and I was so frustrated. I said, I don't know how anything goes through here. This is ridiculous. So he just laughed at me. He said, I'll attend the next meeting. He listened to them all, he made his judgment, and he said, I've listened to you, it's taken place, it's going to be in the finance bill, we shall not block it.
Within a few years, the International Financial Services Centre was generating hundreds of millions for the Exchequer. For Haughey, an ambitious initiative of this type had the potential for personal as well as political advantage.
He did come into contact with a new generation of entrepreneurs and who believed that if he was in power, that he would introduce economic policies that would be to the wider benefit, but also to their benefit.
I remember people at the time, in 87, 88, they gave Charlie money, and they said to Charlie, here's 50,000, here's 100,000, do whatever you like with it. For me, he believed in the IFSC, so what he looks for me, I'm more happy to give it to him. Then, and now, and in the future.
Secure in power, Haughey's personal finances were flourishing, thanks to donations from businessmen. Now he could afford to relax and enjoy his new role on the international stage.
He actually groomed himself to be a statesman. He sort of acted the part of a statesman and became that.
I personally have introduced certain aspects of French culture and protocol into the business of government. My ministers have to kiss me on both cheeks before cabinet meetings. Afterwards, I help them to their feet and we get on with the business of running this country.
Haughey defied his critics by spending over £17 million, bringing the dilapidated government buildings up to a standard befitting his stature.
He loved the sense of meeting with these people. He gained considerable status because he was meeting with Cole and he was meeting with Thatcher and he was meeting with Mitterrand and all the rest of them. He got on very well with Mitterrand. The two shared many preoccupations. At the meeting, Mitterrand, who was a gamey sort of a fellow, had 3 beautiful women with him. You could see Charlie's mind wasn't totally on what Mitterrand was saying.
Haughey had acquired some of the other trappings of the European statesman, however. For years he had been conducting an affair. Terry Keane, a fashion journalist, had been introduced to Haughey in the 1960s. In the early 70s, the two began a relationship.
His relationship with Terry Keane was a very expensive one. They went to the most expensive restaurants, they drank the most expensive wines and champagne.
Dear Diary, there's a certain powerful person who'll be receiving all sorts of...
Now in the late 80s, Keane began to drop hints about their affair in her weekly gossip column that were quickly picked up on.
Instead of the beautiful...
No, I'll tell you, but I lash off a line or two to your woman at the end though as well, boss. Always letting on she knows you, constant references to you. Oh, you know her, you know that L one.
Well, there were always rumours.
For God's sake, man. Anyway, she never leaves you alone. Listen, will I issue a writ, boss, and put manners on her?
No, that won't be necessary. I recall once going to car communications in order to get some training, and Terry Prone just sat down in front of me and said, well now, Sean, what about your father's affair? How are you going to handle that? And I was kind of speechless for a while. I said, what do I say here? Do I let on I don't know about it? And does that make me look like a total idiot? Do I say to her, maybe, well, I had suspicions or what? So I sat there speechless for a minute.
Rumours flourished, but for now, Haughey's affair with Keane would remain just a subject of gossip and innuendo. Charles Haughey was keeping other secrets. In 1987, he was preparing to become the first Taoiseach to meet with the leadership of the Republican movement. The Belfast priest, Father Alec Reid, was behind the initiative.
I went to Cardinal O'Fee and asked him if he would host a meeting between John Hume, Gerry Adams and Mr. Haughey. So then we arranged for a time and a date.
Remember, I mean, to even hold such meetings was completely taboo and against the orthodoxy that, you know, you don't talk to terrorists. There's no question that he was taking a very big political risk.
At the last minute, however, the meeting was postponed when it looked like John Hume might be delayed in Brussels.
But the next thing that happened then, within about 10 days, Enniskillen.
The bomb had been planted at a community centre close to the War Memorial.
It really frightened Mr. Haughey because you can see if it got out that he was meeting, people were blowing up civilians in Enniskillen. I think he may have thought that the whole thing was a plot, you know?
But Haughey held his nerve and authorised secret talks between the government and Sinn Féin.
It was a risk for Charlie Haughey to take, and I think the history books will record that contribution in the sense that they are not going to date the beginnings of the peace process to just Albert Reynolds and later to Bertie Ahern. Haughey's name is going to have to be factored in there.
Eventually, the pressure began to take its toll. In October '88, Haughey was rushed to hospital with breathing problems. The illness was played down, but in fact, Haughey came close to death.
He was very, very seriously ill, at a very low ebb. People came to see him in hospital and they were very shocked at his appearance and at his weakness and fatigue. And one of the people who held things together for Mr. Haughey was Brian Lenihan.
Haughey and Lenihan had been close since the 1960s, their friendship surviving decades of party infighting. Now, as Haughey recuperated, he discovered Lenihan was suffering from liver disease.
I told him that Brian's only chance was a liver transplant, and Mr. Haughey immediately burst into tears and he wept.
Mr. Haughey called me into his office one day and said, look, Lenihan's in trouble. Go out and raise sufficient money to make sure that it looks after his medical expenses and the other expenses around it.
Kavanagh raised over £150,000 and Lenihan travelled to the US for his operation. But not all the money raised went to Brian Lenihan.
Haughey got in more than was required and he spent the rest of it on himself. He had a very carefree attitude with other people's money.
The Lenihan money was channelled through the party leader's account. This account, funded by the taxpayer, was meant to cover official expenses.
He used it to pay for Charvet shirts in Paris costing £16,000. He used it to pay for dinners in the Coq Ardee restaurant, which cost £15,000. He took £25,000 at one stage and lodged it into his own personal account in Guinness and Mahon.
Don't touch my wheel.
He used the party's money as if it was his own personal money. In doing so, he had the help of the current Taoiseach, Bertie Ahern, because Bertie Ahern and Charles Haughey were co-signatories on the account.
Cheques were usually filled in with the payee and the amount for salaries for the press office, taxi bills, and bills relating to Mr. Haughey for Le Coq Ardee or whatever. And Bertie Ahern would come down to my office and sign them. I once saw him sign an entire book of blank cheques.
Literally, I signed books of cheques. I mean, that was the procedure. I didn't see my role as being the watchdog of what the party leader did with the leaders' fund.
The times are favourable. The opportunity.
As ever, the voters were unaware of exactly how Haughey was using their money. In 1989, his popularity was at a high as the economy began to recover. Haughey saw his chance.
Our spirits are high. Let us take the tide at the flood.
In April, his minority government was defeated in a Dáil vote. It was an embarrassment, though not necessarily grounds for an election. But Haughey and a few colleagues thought otherwise.
I remember Ray Burke was very keen on having it. And Pádraig Flynn, I think they both were pushing the idea, yes, let's go to the country, swagger, swagger, let's show what a wonderful people we all are.
Do you think you'll get an overall majority?
Well, that's the general objective, yes.
But could there have been another potential advantage to calling an election?
Fianna Fáil was more popular with the business classes than perhaps it had been for a very long time. So there was a lot of money there for Fianna Fáil to tap.
We had collected about the 1.7 million, but we had spent 2.3 million.
Jeez, don't let me Charlie jumped off.
Frankly, we never realised how much was going astray at the time.
Certain cabinet ministers received huge donations. Ray Burke kept £20,000 meant for Fianna Fáil, and Pádraig Flynn accepted £50,000 from a developer. He disputes this was meant for the party.
He gave it to me for the simple reason that he stated to me personally. He liked me, and he wanted me to have a successful campaign, and he wanted me to succeed in politics. That was it. Simple as that.
I suppose that they lived in a culture where Mr. Haughey was doing what he was doing. They were junior to him, and they would say to themselves, well, if this is happening at the top, why can't I avail of these facilities as well? So I suppose that's the environment now in retrospect that they lived in.
Haughey's own election dividend came courtesy of Irish Permanent, whose chief executive gave him a cheque for £30,000.
20,000 of which was meant for Brian Lenihan ended up in accounts belonging to Celtic Helicopters, the company owned by Charles Haughey's son.
And on the day of the poll, Mark Kavanagh, who had developed the IFSC, says he gave Haughey £100,000, the bulk of which was meant for the party.
I wasn't aware at the time that he'd given 100,000 in, Mr. Haughey gave us a cheque for 25,000, made it out to Fianna Fáil, which we lodged in our account, and at the time we assumed that was what Mark Cavan had given him.
The story of the election, of course, is how it's changed since '87. Fianna Fáil are down 5.1. Owen Ryan, Fianna Fáil.
It was the only gain Haughey would make from the '89 election.
Dick Roach of Fianna Fáil, still a little bit of work to do. And look at the gains. The right going to the left.
You called it, you didn't have to, you made a judgment, it was a political judgment and it backfired.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely right. It was a political judgment.
See, what people were worried about was why the election was being called at all and what was the real motivation behind it.
How do we get a government out of this election?
Well, I think a government will have to be got from it.
When the results were all in, for me, it was very simple. It was a matter of arithmetic. We had 77 seats, they had 6, 83. Which do you prefer, folks? Being in government or being on the other side howling at the moon? And it was a no-brainer.
I don't like coalition governments. I don't think they're the best option.
Whatever a bigger step it was for Haughey, in my view, was a bigger step for O'Malley. Because he had founded a party. Their whole raison d'etre was anti-Charlie Haughey.
We were faced with the rather bleak prospect that we either tried to negotiate a coalition government or we went and had another general election.
Fine Gael, maybe? Could you talk to them again?
No, I couldn't. I'm talking.
In my view, he didn't have any ideological mistrust of it, but he didn't think he could carry the Fianna Fáil party.
Well, I had taken a position from the very start that I wasn't in favour of coalition with the PDs. But he appointed RTÉ Hearn and myself to do the negotiations.
Nothing is ruled in, nothing is ruled out.
But Albert copped on after a few days that there was other things going on that he knew nothing about.
A lot of the decisions have been made without our knowledge.
Behind the scenes, Haughey did a deal directly with O'Malley. He would take his party into coalition with or without the approval of his negotiators.
He shook hands with me when the thing was finally agreed, and he made some remark about, I think he and nobody else might have been able to achieve this. I just gritted my teeth and said, well, we'll get on with it now, and I hope it works out.
Before the end of the negotiations, before we were finished anyway, I got a phone call from Charlie at one stage who said that the deal had been finalised. Sick was the only way I could say it, and I think there were others were sick too. I regarded single-party government as a core value of the Fianna Fáil party. Power, getting power, keeping power, that was it. And he had to be in government at any price.
For the first time in its history, Fianna Fáil entered into coalition. But in breaking his party's core value, Haughey had alienated two powerful figures within the ranks of his own cabinet.
The PDs done us. And they wouldn't have if he had taken my bloody advice on that day in the office in 1989. I said, we'll have them out inside 18 months and we'll be back with an overall majority. And he didn't want to risk it. And he only said to me, all the bets are paid, P. All your bets are paid. In other words, I owe you nothing, you owe me nothing. I said, this is a dirty little deal. And he only said to me, yes, I'll hold you responsible for none of it.
Despite all predictions to the contrary, the Fianna Fáil PD coalition seemed remarkably stable. Haughey and O'Malley proved able to do business together.
In a sense, you had to take Haughey at two levels. You knew that he was an outrageous rogue. But just on a purely personal level, he was a personable individual, and he had a certain amount of style and could be quite entertaining.
In 1990, Charles Haughey was widely praised for his handling of the EU presidency. Now he seemed set for another triumph, with Brian Lenihan as the party's candidate for the Irish presidency.
I think that was probably the worst campaign ever. And the whole thing was pretty nasty. There were some awful things said.
It was the time which I felt as low about anything that in all of my political life.
I think expediency won over what was right. And I deeply regret that now.
Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Questions and Answers.
On October 22nd, Lenihan was making a scheduled appearance on RTÉ.
He's probably the most popular politician in Leinster House.
Halfway through, a member of the audience asked a seemingly innocuous question.
Did he make a phone call or phone calls to Áras an Uachtaráin in that period in February 1982?
The allegation was that Brian Lennon had rung Áras an Uachtaráin looking for Patrick Hillery and was asking him not to dissolve the Dáil in 1982 when the Fine Gael Labour government collapsed, and to allow Fianna Fáil to come into office without having an election.
No, I didn't at all. That never happened.
And to my astonishment, Brian Lennon said he hadn't. Well, I have to say that's wrong.
Excuse me, I was in Áras an Uachtaráin when those phone calls came through, and I know how many there were.
I don't know who they were from, in any way.
Now, there was nothing very serious about that. I think Brian Lennon or anybody else was perfectly entitled to convey a message to the President.
But Lenihan's honesty was about to be called into question. 6 months earlier, he'd told student Jim Duffy that he had called the Áras that night in '82. And Duffy had a tape to prove it.
What you made a phone call? I did. Yes, Sylvester Barrett and Mr. Haughey. Yeah. And did any of the phone calls get through to the President straight?
Oh yeah, I mean, I got through to him. I remember talking to him.
He lied in one or he lied in the other. Take your choice. That was what the public believed.
I've never spoken to the President at all in regard to any of the matters that have been suggested.
I got a phone call to say, OK, it's really bad. In the meantime, Sean Dignan was on, and he was presenter at the 6-1 News, and said, Niamh, look, I think that the better way to handle this would be to have Brian come out to the studios in RTÉ.
Now, is that enough?
Mr. Lenihan,
is that enough?
So we said, yeah, OK, let's go out to the studio, address this once and for all.
I said, look, you know, this is you talking to the nation, you know.
And we knew that he'd handle it, and handle it very well.
On mature recollection at this stage, that I did not ring President Hillery.
The words he was saying and the actions were alien to me as being Brian's behaviour.
I did not ring President Hillery on that night.
But I certainly didn't expect him to stare into the camera and frighten the people.
That mature recollection of mine is the correct one.
It was probably a mistake on my part, because it was an interview rather than you know, a piece to camera that you'd be doing.
All of RTÉ were in the room with me, and they were just shocked.
It's wider than just the presidency.
Sean?
You've now got the government in problems.
Sean?
Don't you think in those circumstances...
And that was it, it was over.
They all heard your voice on the tape, though, that's the difficulty.
Lenihan's campaign was sunk, but now suddenly much more was at stake for Charles Haughey.
To Dr. Hillery, on the occasion, do you understand plain English?
Because he was a member of the government, it wasn't just a Fianna Fáil matter. We were also in the government.
Have some decorum in this matter.
I felt quite upset if he'd been advised to just admit things as they were and say that he was confused as a result of the illness. The public would have accepted that, and we'd have accepted it.
With the PDs threatening to pull out of government, Haughey had a choice: drop his friend from the cabinet or face a general election. Haughey summoned Lenihan to Kinsealy and urged him to resign.
I was there with the two of them. It was a terrible meeting, and I remember it very, very clearly. But Charlie felt he had to act. Brian understood that.
Did he offer his resignation, Mr. Haughey?
Oh, no. Nor did I seek it. Nor did I seek it.
Later that day, a letter of resignation was handed to Brian Lenihan.
My father was to take full responsibility for everything, and it was like almost a suicide note. When the letter was shown to my mother on the campaign bus, she just simply looked at it and said, tore it in 2 pieces or 3 pieces, and said, "You're not signing that, Brian."
Not resigning. I don't have any obligation to do so until I am elected president. Then I will do so.
But of course, that didn't stop the pressure from Mr. Haughey's direction.
And he went missing, down to Athlone. The Taoiseach wanted to talk to him, and he couldn't contact him. And he was highly annoyed about that. So he asked myself and Albert to go down and get him back.
We were aware of the crowds massing in Athlone and of the tensions which were running very high when up drew the ministerial car and Pádraig Flynn.
And she was not kind to us.
I'm your friend, he said. And Brian's friend, I'm coming to Athlone to help to smooth matters.
She told us where to go in no uncertain terms.
And I said, you, F-U-C-K, across the Shannon, and never let me see you again.
And we tried to explain to her, but she wasn't for listening.
They both scarpered, they did. You couldn't have gone into that crowd. You just couldn't. They couldn't. Anyway.
But Haughey kept up the pressure, dispatching a helicopter to a house in the Midlands where Lenihan was staying.
We decided we'd buzz the house with the helicopter. So that was fine. So we got into the helicopter and we're circling the house.
My father was upstairs in an upstairs bedroom. he sort of woke up and there was the undercarriage of a helicopter right outside his window. And of course, he later came down to breakfast and said that it was sort of like a Vietnam movie rather than a presidential election.
Then one of the other guys on the helicopter decided, oh, I have a good idea. Why don't we try and climb out of the helicopter and into the window? Now, at that, I said, no, OK, the madness here stops.
But it sort of indicated, you know, the sort of relentless efforts Charlie would always put into to get his way.
Back in Dublin, with the PDs on the brink of quitting the government, Haughey reached a decision. If Lenihan wouldn't resign, he would sack him.
I was opposed to it and asked that if the PDs came looking for his head on a plate, would he be as willing to cooperate?
All politicians will do things to hold on to power that, you know, are harsh, cruel sometimes, and that was one of those.
The army motorcycle escort that would carry messages in a brown bag around to ministers arrived with the letter of dismissal saying that he was dismissed from the government. So we looked at the letter and travelled into the Dáil.
I regret to have to inform the House that this evening I requested the Taoiseach and Minister for Defence, Mr Brian Lenihan TD, to resign as a member of the government and that he failed to comply with this request. Accordingly, I propose to exercise my constitutional prerogative to advise the President to terminate his appointment as a member of the government.
Here was the man that had defended the party through thick and thin, and we had to do this to him.
I think half we had, you know, told the PDs to fuck off, that we weren't going to go that far, that they might have blinked. And I deeply regret that now.
My father had felt very let down at being dismissed. I think he felt that, you know, very damaged as a person as a result of it.
Leaving the Dáil there that night, and I remember saying, is it ever well worth it?
Our first ever woman president.
For many in Fianna Fáil, Haughey's decision to sack Lenihan was unforgivable. By sacrificing his friend to stay in power, Haughey had perhaps sealed his own fate.
I would hope that anything untoward or hurtful or wounding will now be put aside and forgotten.
The way in which he disposed of even former friends and colleagues like Brian Lenihan suggested that really there wasn't any core. It was just layers and layers of onion that you peeled back until there was nothing at all left within.
How do you protect yourself every morning? Danone Actimel with Alkazi Immunitas is scientifically proven to help strengthen your natural defenses.
When you work outside in all weathers, you've got to be prepared. You never know what you'll have to deal with.
Help strengthen your natural defenses with Danone Actimel.
And now there's Danone Actimel 0.1% fat in original, strawberry and raspberry and cranberry. The lighter way to enjoy Actimel. Danone. chose cool, clean action.
From August the 9th to the 13th, the greatest show in Ireland is on at the RDS. The Fáilte Ireland Dublin Horse Show. Edge of your seat stuff.
Over the years, I've colored and recolored my hair. And you know what? My hair always looks in perfect condition.
Excellence Cream by L'Oreal, the only triple protection hair color. Before the serum protects, during the non-drip cream protects, after the ceramide conditioner protects.
My hair's so cared for. My color's sensational, and not a single gray. Color and recolor with confidence. Isn't your hair worth excellence?
Triple protection Excellence Cream from L'Oreal Paris, celebrating 10 years of excellence.
You're worth it.
What can you add to Don Carlos olive oil to make it even more delicious? Anything you like. Don Carlos, the Spanish for olive oil.
To help us make the most of our holidays, it's now 3 for 2 on travel healthcare, films, and deodorants at Boots.
Some things don't work without lines, but our broadband does. It's wireless broadband in a box for just $18.95 a month. Call Irish Broadband or visit irishbroadband.ie.
Fixident Food Seal has a thinner nozzle which allows for precise application. This helps to give a better seal against food infiltration. Fixident Food Seal, life with more bite.
Put life back in your laundry. The new Equaltis from Hotpoint. The new Equaltis from Hotpoint. Deeply different.
Leg. Breast.
Definitely leg.
I am.
Leg.
Breast every time.
Leg or breast? Hellman's makes it. The Hellman's Great Irish Sandwich Competition. See in store for details.
The people who conspired to bring down Jack Lynch conspired to bring down Haughey.
By 1991, Charles Haughey had been leader of Fianna Fáil for 11 years. Now many began to think about life after him, and one man in particular was impatient for change.
It's obvious to me, he says, that you want to become leader of this party. I said, yeah, sometime. He says, you're going to wait a while. Good while. Charlie Haughey had done such an exceptionally good job. The economy was growing. He had made it. And I thought surely now that he would certainly be contemplating moving on.
As Reynolds prepared the ground, Haughey began to falter. In the autumn of '91, the darker side of the new money economy began to reveal itself.
Allegations of irregularities in Goodman meat plants.
This whole Greencore affair is a highly irregular transaction.
Current controversy
In the interest of the company, tendered his resignation.
It sort of confirmed suspicions that all was not well in corporate Ireland, that anybody who could make a quick buck was out to make a quick buck.
He rejected suggestions of there being a stench of corruption about, but said the government was determined.
The controversy centres around the extension of a sewerage pipe next to the Taoiseach's lands at
Surrounding the
Abbeyville.
sale of the Johnston, Mooney and O'Brien site to Telecom Éireann.
That was a very, very complicated property deal in which involved Telecom buying a site at a vastly inflated price.
Today, Michael Smurford resigned from Telecom.
But it became clear that Dermot Desmond had made a substantial profit in the middle of the deal, and money from those profits was used to refurbish Charles Haughey's yacht.
According to Desmond, the £75,000 used for refurbishing Celtic Mist was a loan.
I'm quite happy to have given Conor Haughey money for Celtic Mist for the refurbishment. If Charlie came along to me tomorrow morning and wanted $1 million or $2 million, I'd only be delighted to give it to him.
This is a government of absolute integrity.
When a Prime Minister lies to Parliament,
Deputy Spring making groundless false allegations.
I put it to you, sir, that you should resign from your office.
And then Charlie gave a rather cheeky comment, throwaway line in the interview on RTÉ on Sunday.
How much longer do you want to lead Fianna Fáil?
Well, some of those Chinese leaders, you know, stay on till about they're 80 and 90. I think that would be probably a bit long.
I tend to think that some of them kind of believed that, and they said to shield down their spine. And then they started getting busy.
There seemed to be an accumulation of one thing after the other. I just felt that something needed to be done, and somebody needed to take a stand.
Within days, Noel Dempsey and 3 other backbenchers called on Haughey to go.
Deputies of the Parliamentary Party hereby resolve by secret ballot to discontinue the leadership forthwith of Charles J. Haughey.
Taoiseach, can I ask you if you regard this afternoon's statement as a challenge to your leadership?
Please, would you mind?
I had no idea. In fact, I was walking out the door to go to Longford to do a presentation of tidy towns.
And I said, well, Albert, as I see it, if you don't stand up and be counted this time, you will never lead the Fianna Fáil party.
There's nothing personal in this against the Taoiseach of the day, certainly not. But I have a responsibility to, as I said, to say what I believe is right.
He phoned me to say that he had heard that I was supporting the vote of no confidence, and he said, you know what that means, you have to be removed from office. I says, that's fine. Goodbye, good luck.
Albert Reynolds had another powerful ally in Cabinet.
There comes a time when a change is necessary, and I believe that that change is now. And it wasn't easy for me to make that final decision. There was a personal conversation between the two of us, pretty blunt and straight. And he dismissed me. I'm sure it was painful for him, but by Jove, it was painful for me.
Well, you know, Porrick is Porrick, isn't he? And he made a decision that he wanted to be part of a new gang. I think his behaviour was ghastly.
But Haughey, it seemed, had little to worry about. Although 2 senior ministers were calling for him to go, the rest of the Cabinet rallied round.
What Albert is doing now is so wrong that he should, even at this late stage, pull back from wrecking the government and throwing the country into a state of panic and chaos.
The whole leadership issue and battle was unnecessary. And I knew when he came back from the summer's holidays in 91 that he wasn't going to stay long. But he wasn't going to go down on a challenge to the party, having won 3.
On the night, Haughey won the vote easily by a margin of over 2-1. But unknown to Haughey, Reynolds had advised his supporters not to reveal their hand.
Don't vote for me because I said I'm not going to win. And there's no point in exposing the votes we have. The next day will be the day, not today.
Has the party been damaged?
Not in the least. Aren't you pleased?
You think it can survive?
Aren't you pleased? We won it so convincingly that I felt that was the end of it.
A few days after the vote, the businessman Ben Dunn visited Haughey. Dunn was carrying 3 bank drafts worth over £200,000, intended for members of the Dunn family.
He was feeling low, in my opinion. The drafts were in the back of my pocket, and I said, look, there you are. There's something for yourself. And he put his hand out, and he said, thanks. I think he might have said, thanks a million, big fella.
This was the first time that Haughey is known to have accepted money directly from the businessman. Dunn's apparently impulsive act would later prove central to uncovering the secrets of Haughey's wealth.
Peter, can I ask you how you're feeling this morning?
In the short term, however, other events from Haughey's past were about to resurface. In early 1992, his time in power was drawing to a close.
And that was a very kind of an uncertain time, hugely uncertain. Is Albert Reynolds going to mount another challenge? Is Charlie Haughey going to go? What's going to happen?
My deduction was that in some way, whatever plan was in place involved Dr. John O'Connell.
Dr. John O'Connell, a Fianna Fáil TD, was familiar with some of Haughey's private business transactions. In 1985, he had been the conduit for a payment to Haughey of £50,000 from Mahmoud Fustok, a wealthy Saudi Arabian. The payment was reportedly for a horse. Now, in January '92, Dr. O'Connell and Haughey had a number of meetings.
Dr. John O'Connell called in to see me to say that he would like to see Mr. Haughey also. He told me he was going to urge Mr. Haughey to retire as Taoiseach and from politics because he was very concerned about him, concerned about his health.
Haughey may well have feared that disclosure from any source of a payment such as the one from Fustok had the potential to ruin him. Speaking on the record for the first time, Dr. O'Connell has confirmed that he held another crucial meeting with Haughey that month. The meeting, at the home of a friend in Sutton, was described as not amicable. O'Connell denies that the Fustok payment was discussed, but states that he did speak to Haughey about his health and of discontent within the party. Crucially, O'Connell claims that days later he received a letter from Haughey promising to resign on or around the 22nd of March. Although O'Connell was in contact with Albert Reynolds at the time, both men are adamant that they were not working together to bring Haughey down.
Well, I don't know whoever saw me, very much linked to O'Connell, but whoever... You know, at that time, all sorts of rumours went out, all sorts of rumours. I knew for quite some time that the game was up. It was only a question of calling it at the right time.
And I think into that stepped Sean Doherty.
Well, Doherty had always felt that he was the fall guy for what had gone wrong in the early 1980s, that as Minister for Justice, he had presided over the phone tapping of journalists' phones.
I had isolated him. He was dismissing Doherty. In other words, he wasn't even recognising his bloody existence, you know.
By 1992, Doherty had made a decision that he was no longer prepared to soldier on in silence. In mid-January, he gave an interview to Nighthawks, a late-night talk show.
You took the rap for Charlie Haughey on the Bogan thing. You bit the bullet.
I had a job to do. There was a decision taken in Cabinet that the prevention of the leaking of matters from Cabinet must be stopped. I, as Minister for Justice, had a direct responsibility for doing that. I did that. I do feel that I was let down by the fact that people knew what I was doing.
Did that betray any...
After the show, Doherty pointed out to presenter Shay Healy that he had said something important. He was now claiming that Haughey had authorised the phone tapping. But was Doherty acting alone?
It was a bombshell. To me, had no idea that Sean Doherty was going to introduce the matter that he did. And if I had found him before he arrived onto the programme, I'd have asked him, please, please don't. This is not a help. I knew that I had it well and truly wrapped up, and I didn't want any mistakes along the way that might damage the whole effort.
Whether or not Doherty was part of a wider plan, his Nighthawks revelations took on a life of their own. Days after his appearance, the former Justice Minister went a step further.
Each and every one of these relevant transcripts were transported by me to Mr. Haughey's office and handed to him directly.
Suddenly, Haughey was fighting for his political life. In an ominous sign, his PD coalition partners refused to attend Cabinet the following day. Haughey would have to give answers.
The statements made by Senator Sean Doherty yesterday, to the effect that he showed me transcripts of telephone conversations by two journalists, are absolutely false.
He sat on that platform alone. I was sitting at the side, and none of his colleagues were there, former colleagues.
I wish to state categorically that I was not aware at the time of the tapping of these telephones.
It was pretty obvious Doherty was telling the truth. You know, I said, kind of, well, Charlie, it can't go on that type of way.
Yesterday I resigned from the office of Taoiseach by placing my resignation in the hands of the President pursuant to the Constitution.
Yeah, the atmosphere was a bit that of Shakespearean tragedy.
The years during which Deputy Haughey was the central figure on the Irish political stage were marked by a series of controversial anomalies and questions, the kind of questions that can only be answered in the cooler light of history.
And a lot of Shakespeare was quoted across the Dáil.
Mark Antony saying, I've come to bury Caesar, not to praise him, but the Ides of March are not yet upon us.
The speech Haughey quoted ends with Othello killing himself.
I have done the state some service. They know it. No more of that.
It is a statement of pride, but also, I think, of bitterness.
If I were to seek any accolade as I leave office, it would simply be he served the people, all the people, to the best of his ability.
He walked back to his office. The next thing is there's a knock on the door, and it was Brian Lenihan. He was the only person who came back, and Brian says, he says, there they all are. They're running around out there, he says, like headless chickens. The bland leading the bland. I always remember him saying that.
And I asked Mr. Haughey if he would remain a little while longer in the office, that the cleaning staff wished to see him. And he said, certainly. When he opened the gift which they had given him, which was a mass bouquet, to have a mass said for him all the days of his life. And he sobbed, I sobbed. It was just amazing.
All that remained now was for Haughey to ensure that the secrets of his time in government went with him. Before he left, the leader's accounts files were removed. They have never been traced.
I was very depressed about the future. It looked as if the things that I knew about with moral certainty were never going to be exposed, and that the rot would spread, and it did spread. To have lived through those 12, 13 years, it had excitement, it had drama, skullduggery, loyalty, disloyalty. It had everything. And it can never and never will be repeated again.
The former Taoiseach lent his support to National TD, the main fundraising event of the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland.
Well, everybody was worried about how he would cope with retirement. My mother said, what am I going to do with my with my husband around the house all day under my feet?
Will you welcome, please, Charles J. Haughey.
I think he was very heartened by the people he met. You know, they really gave him a warm welcome, and that certainly heartened him.
Anne Jordan from Dublin says Charles J. Haughey is quite simply the greatest statesman Ireland has ever known. How about that? The phones are hopping.
But eventually, when things were going well, his past caught up with him.
There may be trouble ahead.
11 days after Haughey made his resignation speech in the Dáil, Ben Dunn was in a hotel in Florida.
I had my difficulties, and difficulties is the wrong word.
He took a lot of cocaine. There was a call girl in the room. He seems to have lost control.
Something which humiliated his family members in Dunn Stores. They were absolutely furious with Ben Dunn.
Before the fiddlers have fled.
After a lot of to and fro, I am stripped of my chairmanship, and civil war is the only way I could put it.
So Ben came up with an elaborate plan to try and get money out of the business.
Like, geez, if I'm going down, others are going to go down. So I decided I had to take my family into court.
He was saying that the Dunn's trust was an absolute fraud. He wanted it broken up. And among the things he said that showed it was a fraud was that he had given more than £1 million to Charles Haughey.
Haughey was tipped off about Ben Dunn's allegations. His secret might be out. He faced ruin. But at the 11th hour, Dunn settled with his family out of court.
Haughey was aware that there was a widening circle of people getting access to this information that had the potential to destroy his reputation.
For 2 more years, Haughey's secret stayed hidden. Disclosure, when it came, emerged from nowhere. In November '96, a story broke that Ben Dunn had paid for an extension to the home of a Fine Gael minister.
And it was like the opening of Pandora's box. The word started going around about a bigger payment by Ben Dunn to another political figure, whom it quickly became apparent to everyone in the know was Charles Haughey.
In desperation, Haughey began to make calls to Noel Smith, Ben Dunn's solicitor.
Noel Smith kept logging the meetings, the contents of those particular meetings. Haughey assumed that Smith was on his side and wanted to cover it up, but Smith's loyalty was to his client, Ben Dunn.
Within weeks, the media tentatively began to link Haughey to a £1 million payment from Ben Dunn.
He would have known that, this was causing difficulties for me personally. It was obvious that he didn't want to discuss it, and that, that he appeared to be in some sort of denial.
And Haughey kept denying, confident there was no evidence linking him to the money. But the net was beginning to close.
Tribunal of inquiry into the Dunn's payments affair was now imminent. Dunn, the first witness, told the payments to politicians
had approached Ben Dunn to raise around £900,000 to ease Mr. Haughey.
Said that Mr. Haughey had said that he had never received any money from Ben Dunn.
He just insisted that Ben was lying, that he had not received any money. He decided to brazen it out.
But there was one piece of evidence that Haughey had forgotten. The bank drafts that he had received directly from Dunn at Kinseely in 1991.
So Smith went out to see Haughey. He brought with him the 3 bank drafts, and he said, "Do you know anything about these?" Haughey says, "No, I don't." And he notices Haughey's demeanour. Haughey is panicking, that he looks terrified, that he sees the whole world crashing in on top of him.
The drafts were a direct link from Dunn to Haughey. But despite all the evidence now amassed by the tribunal team, Haughey kept denying.
He told his own legal team this wasn't true. He gave them instructions on the basis, I am been wronged, I am the victim of a false allegation.
But the final blow to Haughey's defence was about to come. Noel Smith told the tribunal he had detailed logs of his conversations with Haughey.
And there it was, Haughey's denial against the lawyer's contemporaneous notes. It was game, set and match. Haughey was caught out.
The tribunal had also cracked the secret of Haughey's offshore Ansbacher accounts. He had misled his legal team and his family. He now had no choice but to come clean.
I was amazed, yeah. I had no idea. Angry, I suppose, is a strong word to use. But, I mean, let's be honest, we could have done without it now.
Shortly after 7 a.m. on the morning of the 15th of July, Charles Haughey's car slipped quietly through the gates of Dublin Castle.
And I remember speaking to a woman at the tribunal. She says, "I was coming to work this morning at 8 o'clock on the bus from Raheny, which is in the heart of Haughey's constituency." And she says, and the bus driver had his own little radio at the front of the bus, and they reported that Charlie Haughey had managed to evade the press and get into the castle by a big gate. And she says, everybody in the bus broke into spontaneous applause.
I thought it was incredibly poignant. And Dublin Castle itself is such an ambiguous place in our history. It's where, Michael Collins arrived a few minutes late and said, well, we've waited 700 years. And in the 700 years, it was the place where many an Irishman faced his doom.
Just before 11 a.m., Haughey took the witness stand.
Here he was, stripped down, bare, unmasked. The emperor had no clothes, and had to admit that indeed he had received the money from Ben Dunn.
Afterwards, everybody was standing out in the yard. Haughey came out the main door of Dublin Castle to wave at the crowd, and some people cheered and he waved, and then everybody started booing. And you could see the shock in his face that he didn't know what to do. I mean, everything had changed.
He was very shattered. I think he felt totally betrayed by the state.
There was something slightly plaintive about the spectacle of an ordinary dub who had trusted this man absolutely, and still in a sense did so. I think in one sense, maybe that was Haughey's lowest moment, because it's when, in a way, he's confronted with the unquestioning trust of simple people whom he really has probably betrayed.
In the years to come, Haughey's humiliating fall would continue. He would face criminal charges for allegedly obstructing the tribunal, and the breathtaking scale of his reliance on businessmen would be revealed. An estimated £8.5 million over one 18-year period.
You take 8.5 million from benefactors of some kind or another. I mean, who needs 8.5 million, you know? That was breaking the ethos of the party.
I gave him 100,000, maybe 150. I can't remember how much I gave him, but he needed the money and I was quite happy to give it to him.
Ben Dunn said he did not even know that Charles Haughey had set up the first meeting with then Revenue...
In his final years, the Moriarty Tribunal continued to pursue evidence of specific favours done by Haughey in return for his donors' cash. But the simple revelation that Haughey was a kept man was enough to tarnish his reputation forever.
You're the Taoiseach of a country. You're the Prime Minister. You can't do that. And those people who are trying to justify it are wrong. It's as simple as that.
It was a lonely time, and probably the first lonely time that we've ever had in his life, as in that there really wasn't anybody else around, only the family.
Would you welcome, please, Terry Keane? Terry Keane.
In 1999, Haughey's mistress, Terry Keane, told him she was about to go public on their affair. Haughey, it seems, kept the news to himself.
I was in that evening with my wife, and I think she might have shouted to me, "Come in here, you better watch the Late Late Show."
What was it that attracted you to him?
He was larger than life. He was very attractive. I mean, he is very attractive. Strong, clever, entertaining, amusing, irreverent. Wonderful.
That was dramatic, right enough.
And did he know you were coming on the Late Late Show tonight?
Yes, he did. I had lunch with him yesterday.
I was in England at the time and my brother rang me, so...
I think he loves me very much. I love him very much.
You love him very much?
I love him very much.
I see.
Everything else we dealt with as a family, so this was different.
They suffer every day from what they hear in the papers. I think what I say and my story, they will recognise as truth, and I don't think it will hurt them.
It's not for me to judge any of this, really, why she did that or why my father did this. It is for them to discuss, really.
I thought she betrayed him most cruelly, and I thought she caused unbelievable and overwhelming hurt to an innocent Maureen Haughey.
In 2003, Charles Haughey sold his Abbeyville estate for a reported €45 million. Even after settling a massive tax bill, the deal left him independently wealthy for the remaining years of his life. But this was not how Haughey's story was supposed to end.
I think he's always believed that history would show what he did do, the positives. But now I'm not so sure.
I think his legacy is of a very good legislator. But there will be the darker side. there is the darker side.
Haughey was a very destructive and corrosive and corrupting, in the best sense of the word, influence on the country.
I think in the fullness of time, he will remain a controversial figure. He is the single leader who brought about the most corrupt environment in the history of this state.
Over 10 years of boom and absolutely unprecedented prosperity in this country. And you have to give Haughey the credit for it. And the historian in 30 years' time will be giving Haughey the credit for it.
He had the capacity to be one of the best Taoiseachs we had in the country. If he hadn't been so bothered about power and money and got on with doing his job, I think he would have been seen very positively. So there is a kind of tragedy there, I think, of lost talent.
Maybe the tragedy is there was no tragedy because he wasn't really as great as he looked. His acquisition of wealth was utterly questionable and corrupt.
On the 13th of June 2006, Charles Haughey died at the age of 80. As a former Taoiseach, he was accorded a full state funeral. His supporters and his opponents came together to pay their respects.
There will not be his like ever again.
Our attitude to Charles J. Haughey, however, appears more complex. Tens of thousands were expected to attend his funeral. In the end, few gathered to say goodbye. As he passed into our history, Haughey's flaws and his achievements remained, as ever, hard to reconcile.
There were times when I loved him, and then there were times when I just hate him. But he certainly was an enigma, no question about it.
It's a funny thing to be able to say that a man did things which were so wrong and so bad, and yet he had so much good in him.
He was a good companion. He was funny. He was sardonic. He was humorous. He had a wicked tongue. He was never anything but interesting, and there was always an edge.
I always got on very well with him. He did an awful lot. I think he could have done a little bit more in many ways, but then I think he let himself down. That's the way I look at it. I think he did let himself down.
And that's the last in the series of Haughey, but next Monday night at 10:25 you can see True Lives, Dear Frankie. Haughey, the complete RTÉ series, is out now on DVD nationwide.
Facing west into the setting sun, the Dingle Peninsula.
67.5% of the houses are empty now.
At the moment, even the name Dingle seems suddenly uncertain.
Dingle itself is a brand name, and we regard that brand as important as Coca-Cola.
The people of the Dingle Peninsula are squeezed from both land and sea.
Most of the people are leaving the sea and heading into the construction jobs and whatever else they can get.
Stars of the Sea, Friday at 7:30 on RTÉ One.
Pure flavor, simple pleasure, the bend in the river. Take me there.
Catch the sun setting before it will rise.
Switch to Imagine and get free broadband. Yes, free broadband. This free 20-hour-a-month package is only available with a $9.99 local and national call package. Connection fee and line rental apply. See imagine.ie now. Terms and conditions apply.
Born all day, isn't it? Let's kick something off.
Oh, so you've an idea what I should do with my SSIA money, do you?
Trackers work well for mortgages, so why not have a tracker for my SSIA cash as well?
I don't want any setup or exit charges, all right?
I'd like a good rate of interest too. Is that too much to ask?
No problem. With our ECB Tracker Deposit Account, you can use your SSIA money or savings to earn up to 3.75% CAR with instant access to your money at any time. National Irish Bank. New thinking in banking. Now part of the Danske Bank Group.
Rivalry. It's what it's all about. The Bank of Ireland Football Championship. GAA. Unrivaled.
Now you can chill out with all the latest movies for just 1 cent with O2. 1 cent movie rentals. All summer long for O2 customers. It's our way of saying thanks. Visit o2.ie for 1 cent DVD rentals. Only from O2.
Just one look, that's all it took.
Before you decide to drink and drive, take a look at the decisions you could be forcing on others. Just one drink impairs driving.
Just one
Never, ever drink and drive. Could you live with the shame?
That's
From the
all
Road
it
Safety
took.
Authority, supported by AXA Insurance.
Mum is getting a well-deserved break in the sun.
Go play for that. Yeah, it'll be fine. There'll be no problem. She's worrying over that. I don't know what to expect.
He thinks it's a dawdle. He's always saying, oh, sure, what do? You don't have to do anything.
I've never done a food shop before. He's not gone, is he? A little bit stressed out now at the moment.
But will Dad really be able to cope?
I may take 5 minutes out now, because I don't know what's going to happen.
Life Without Me, Friday at 8:30 on RTÉ One.
Good evening from the newsroom. The US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice is meeting the Israeli Foreign Minister in Jerusalem tonight as Israeli forces mount further incursions into southern Lebanon. It's thought that they'll be discussing a meeting Ms Rice had with the Lebanese Prime Minister when she made an unannounced visit to Beirut earlier today. The United Nations has launched an urgent appeal for $150 million to help hundreds of thousands of civilians displaced by Israeli attacks on Lebanon. The appeal came as desperately needed aid arrived by ship in Lebanon's bombed southern port city Tyre. Back home, Gardaí investigating the death of a man in Kilkenny have released a 21-year-old man they had been questioning in connection with discovery of the body found in a burnt-out caravan in County Kilkenny. The body was found at Deer Park near Castlecomer after the alarm was raised early today. Gardaí say 69 people were arrested over the weekend under the new legislation enacted to allow random breath testing. Assistant Garda Commissioner Eddie Rock said this figure was significant. He said that a total of 3,900 people had been tested at checkpoints between Friday and Sunday. And that's the news. Have a very good evening.
Hello and a very good night to you. There's been quite an amount of rain on the west coast during the course of the day. Big change from the east where it was sunny and bright all day, but you can see as we look at the night that rain is going to continue up along the west coast right through until morning time. It's a fairly weak weather system and it'll be gradually drifting northwards and weakening even further during the course of Tuesday. So the rain will eventually clear away northwards. Could spark off a few showers as the tail end of the weather front drifts in across the country during Tuesday afternoon and Tuesday evening, and could be still hanging about to produce a couple of showers on Wednesday, but by and large Wednesday will be a dry day, just those few showers perhaps maybe in the west of the country. Coming back to the current night, and the east will continue to have clear skies as it had for much of the day. The west will be dull and rather damp, really just light amounts of drizzle